ready to go.
Why put my normal top with his
I know. I
so
only do
weird.
it. If you look at our cameras, I'm always.
Why are you doing this?
I don't know.
Are you like grabbing imaginary shit?
I want to like make it wait.
That's like milking a cow. Sorry.
Oh,
I've never done that either.
apples. I don't know.
Oh, you know, when I was in basic, we had to like pick cherries.
Ask me a fun question. Let's do this. Are we live yet?
Yeah, that's supposed to be stream starting.
Yeah. Oh. I've already got messages. Cool. Yeah. Do so well.
Right? You think we haven't done this before?
Right.
All right, so we'll get started with our healthy sexual game. So I'll roll the dice. I'll let Ace read the question, whichever one it is. Ooh, prevention methods.
Okay. And do we pick a number?
Yeah, so Ellie, if you'll pick a number between 1 and 5.
3.
All right, number 3. When it comes to lube, what do you prefer? Water-based, silicone-based, or hybrid?
Well, number 1 preference is natural, created by the bidet. Number 2 preference is water-based.
Yes, that's really good because for women, it's important to use a water-based lube because it doesn't disrupt your natural pH for your vagina. So that's really important. Silicone-based lubes stay around longer and they're not designed for vaginal use really. Like they do break up your pH system. So it's really important to know that to use the right lube for your body parts. So that's really good. Yes. And then Phyllis, we'll have you pick a number between 1 and 5.
4.
4.
Number 4. What is your go-to style of condom and why?
That's a great question. I actually let my husband usually pick the go-to style of condom. I think he gets whatever that comes monthly out of Amazon. I couldn't even tell you.
That's cool.
I'm also
Did you?
6 months pregnant, so clearly we've abandoned the use of condoms at this point.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I will add that for condom usage, it's really cool to know that there is a condom for females and for internal use. So it's called a FC2. It's an internal condom. You can use it in the vagina or in the anus. So there's multiple places you can use it. And the best part is your sexual partner doesn't have to wear a condom. So wearing condom. Your partner. So.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting that she said that her husband, whatever's on Amazon that they
like
order.
Subscribe and save.
Well,
yeah.
no, like I think that's really like it's like a box set. Like you can do with clothes, you can do with shaving kits, you can do with dog treats, all the stuff. It's really like that's a smart move.
Yeah.
But also, I think it was probably I'm not even like I'm almost 40, but literally like not even like 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't know that you had to buy condoms. Because I grew up in gay culture where like I've always been in the bar industry, I've always bartended, and like there's always free condoms everywhere. And people like, and so like my straight friends are like, oh, like I have to go to the drugstore and get like condoms, and I was like, oh, they give them out free there too. They're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, what? Like they just give like what do you like at the pharmacy? He's like, you have to buy them, and I'm like, with like money? It's just weird that like I didn't know people bought them for the longest time, even into adulthood. But it's great because where I work, we also have a bucket up front where it's free condoms, free pamphlets, all kinds of stuff that you can educate yourself with, which I think is awesome. I think that more queer spaces should do that and promote some sexual health.
Yeah, that'd be a really cool thing. Taking condoms into straight bars, like that's just a place where, doing our prevention work, out in the community, that's just a space that not that we're not welcomed, but it's not entertained that we would even be an option, let's put it that way. So I think that would be an interesting place if we could move those spaces to provide condoms. I mean, STIs don't care who they're infecting; they just want to infect. So,
Yeah, I think it's always interesting when we get a group of like bachelorettes or girls that come in or whatever, and they see the condoms and they grab them, and they're just like, "Oh my gosh!" And I'm just like, "Why is it an embarrassing thing? Like you should be proud just to be like, I'm gonna take some condoms. I'm probably gonna have sex later."
Yeah.
Well, you're most likely you're gonna have sex later. You might as well like take your things.
Right. So you can to find places to access free condoms in Kansas City, you can go to igotmine.org, and that's a list of every business and location that's available for you to just walk in and get free condoms. Or now I guess it would be maybe you could order. I know that they're coming up with new ways to deliver the condoms out. So I mailed condoms out to a person yesterday. So that is definitely a way that we can engage with the community. You know, when you can't always go to the spaces you're typically venture to. So our next deck of cards to reflect on would be the race deck. And so they have 1, 2, or 3. So remember, the 1 is your history. The 2 is to know yourself. It's a reflection point. And the 3rd is to take action. So it's an ask. So Ellie went first, so we'll go with Phyllis. Phyllis, if you want to pick a number between 1, 2, or 3.
Let's go with 1.
Yes. And now I have Ace. If you want to select.
I got this one. Okay. What am I reading? Which side do I do?
Oh, okay. Know your history. In 1981, the first cases of what we now call HIV/AIDS were reported by the CDC. In 1984, the HIV virus is identified as the cause of AIDS. So in the early 1980s, when the HIV/AIDS epidemic began, it was framed as affecting white, gay men through data showed an increasingly disproportionate effect on people of color. Knowing that this disease was predominantly affecting people of color back in the 80s when it first started, even now, like reading that card, I'm like, the messaging, the marketing, the direction has all been focused on white gay men and not incorporating how the disease has impacted other individuals, especially people of color in our communities. So knowing that, like, Phyllis, what is your take on that, or your experience or thoughts about that?
No, I think you bring up a great point. And as a Black woman, we've known for a long time, my intersection of identity is actually the most impacted as far as the proportion of HIV infection and size of population. So I agree with you. The marketing actually has to catch up and be more inclusive to who's actually being impacted by this disease. And we have to make sure that folks are informed. When we get a condom question, not just highlighting male brands of condoms, but also highlighting female uses of condoms as well. So I think it's something we have to continuously underscore, particularly in this time, knowing that we're now 40 years into this epidemic.
Ellie, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, that's really interesting because it does feel like as a queer woman, even still, it is not, there's not a lot of marketing in terms of the impact on queer women and their role in it, and certainly on kind of the queer culture, especially concept of this being white, male, gay. So just thinking about how we continue to broaden our understanding even of our history, especially that it's not just how do we change our understanding in the present, but how do we present a more accurate reflection of what was going on that wasn't being shared in our past.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think I jumped ahead and before Phyllis was able to answer, I sort of like stated, when reading that, what my thoughts were, as far as, I was even under the impression that, the disease primarily in the 80s, was impacting white gay men. And if you watch the documentaries from that period that talk about, ACT UP, Larry Kramer's fight, other work being done by organizations and people mobilizing to bring awareness to this disease were white. And there weren't a lot of persons of color who were engaging in that. As far as the messaging that is presented, or that I've seen. So I definitely want to look into that more because I haven't read that card before to see what other, communities are impacted and had their voices out there that we're just not recognizing. And that still 40 years later, we're still not aware of those people of color who are active and mobile and trying to bring about change and awareness.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, I feel like this like whole conversation, even about the 80s, but I think it's, transcended across like, a good 40 years, even that we're coming into now and talking about voter registration and about access to like voting and stuff. And like everything I feel like in our society has always been predominantly like geared towards men anyways. Whether it's marketing or production or things that alleviate things for them, like giving them Cialis, but and things like that.
Yeah.
But like it just everything is so male dominated. And then you take in the fact of that, it's like they push out so many different other groups, Black men, Black women, queer people, like everything else is second, it seems like, or third or fourth or fifth when it comes to like thinking about or moving or fostering any kind of education or help.
Yeah, like expanding the house to accommodate everybody. We talk about, Democrats talk about the big umbrella that they, hold for everybody to be underneath this umbrella. But what about the house?
Well, I think
how do you build a big enough house for everybody?
And I think the more importance is, in the past few years of like what I see is that the fact that women are standing up more. And I mean, there was a whole movement, in the 50s of women's lib and stuff, but like, even now, queer women, people of color, trans individuals, like, if we're not just sitting there and like in our, Chelsea or in our Boys Town or in our Castro and hanging out with their friends and talking, like we're actually moving forward and going out and like being more visible. I think that that's what's important, is being visible, being vocal, and, saying that we don't have to like meet with, pitchforks and torches, but we can still be educated, we can still be smart, we can still congregate in places everywhere, not just our own safer spaces within our community, but to branch out to make more spaces safe. And I think for me personally, coming from a space that I think would be branded in Kansas City as one of the safer spaces for queer people to go, I really try to instill into all my staff, my diverse staff, that especially when COVID happened and we were closed and I got an influx of people that come to our space that were queer or bisexual or questioning and didn't have anywhere else in their lives where they could be who they were, they really felt like, Woody's was their safe space. And now that COVID's happened and everything shut down, what were they going to do? How are they going to be? And even my staff, I instilled in them, even though that our doors are closing temporarily, that our safe space doesn't like, it isn't just the walls and this plaster and the concrete floor around us. Like our safer space is in all of us. And so when we are closed for those months, I expected all my staff to go out and be like, you are a safe space for us. When you go out and you see people that you think may be identifying as whatever, see all these things, like, like sometimes you can just be able to look in someone's eye down the street and let them know, like, I got you. I may not know you, but I know that there's something in us that is family, and like I will be your safe space. Do not be afraid to be who you are. So it's like, it's important to be more visible. I think it's important to be more vocal, and it's important for all of us to branch out and go everywhere and not feel like we're stuck and limited by our neighborhoods or by our bars or by our workplaces.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I like, that we have this opportunity right now to have this conversation and, to educate people who are watching. And then, in the years to come, if they want, this is permanent when we do, these videos and they're online like this, that people can reflect over what changes come, since they talked about this in 2020. How is Kansas City different? How are we impacting our community? And that comes from education. It comes from voter engagement. It comes from people knowing what their choices are, what rights they have, and how they can impact, their community. And I want to thank Ellie and Phyllis for joining us. So we haven't done our introductions yet. So, right, as soon as we get into this, and then we're like, oh yeah, we need to tell everybody who you are. So I'll start first with, we are in the Whole Person right now. So this organization has provided for us to host this conversation. The Whole Person works with disabled individuals regardless of their demographics, their sexual orientation, They are here to serve and to assist those in our community who are some of the most in need. And so if you aren't aware of the whole person, check out their website, check out their Facebook, look into what they do and ways that you can be active in their organization as well. So I am Wes Warner with KC Care. I'm joined with
I'm Ace with Woody's KC.
And we have joining us via Zoom, we have Ellie Grace and Phyllis Hardwick. So Phyllis, if you will tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization, and then you can turn it over to Ellie after that.
Sure. So my name is Phyllis Hardwick. I'm a Kansas Citian that lives in the northeast side of town, south of the river, east of downtown. I work for a group called Show Me Change, which is an offshoot of the Missouri Democratic Party. My specific work is to make sure that every voter who's eligible to vote can vote on election day and that that vote is counted. And this is an election in particular where my work has been evolved given some of the dynamics of this election. So I want to thank you both for providing a platform so that we can, one, put voters at ease, knowing that it is a bit of a unique election cycle, and also make sure that we're supporting them so they can exercise their rights to vote on November 3rd.
Okay, I'm Ellie Grace, and I work with the Voter Network, but my specific project is called Equal Vote, and my work is doing outreach all across the state of Kansas to try to engage and mobilize LGBTQ plus voters. We know that there are a lot of voices that are underrepresented at the polls, and that leads to underrepresentation in the policy making and the political process as a whole. So the Voter Network is a nonprofit, nonpartisan that's working to try to amplify underrepresented voices. And then they have a initiative that I head up that is working specifically with the queer and trans community to make sure our voices are heard.
Thank you. Yeah, so Phyllis, what are some things that you guys are doing, going forward? So today is the last day for individuals to register to vote in the state of Missouri. So tomorrow is, it's like a whole new game because now you're not trying to get people to register to vote. Now you want to make sure they have a plan to vote, that they're engaged, they're ready, that they're educated and telling others. So, I mean, that's a lot to do within 20 some odd days. So.
This is a pretty
It is.
Every election is important, but this one feels like
I love that you're smiling and not just like super stressed and pressured. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's overwhelming now.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm smiling, this is one, I think we're on the right side. So even though my organization is partisan, we pride ourselves on making sure that everybody can vote. And we like to be the group that is really pushing everybody to be able to exercise their rights to vote. And we've known that this was going to be a unique cycle. So we started a while ago. So some of that smile is because we've actually been at this a while, and making sure that we're getting folks through registration is one of our milestones. But we still also have the last day, of course, where you can request an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot. And then, of course, we even have election day. And then, frankly, we have efforts after that to make sure that all the votes are counted. So this is a day that you have more choices than usual as a voter, but you can vote. And you have the right to do so without fear of intimidation at the polling booths. And so my work is guided towards making sure that we have multiple ways for folks to be able to get information that is both online and over the phone, and make sure that folks have resources also at the polling places so that we can make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote can vote on election day, or now even before.
Where do people go to access this information?
Sure. So the first place I will send you is a website called movotesafe.org. It's where you can go to just answer basic questions like, am I registered? What do I have to do if I've moved? And if I want to get a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot, where the process is to do that. Now, you may have a unique situation and a unique case. And so you may want to talk to an actual human. And so we also have a hotline that is staffed by folks who are experts in election law to walk you through what your options are. Also to capture any issues that you've had with trying to vote. And that number is 314-652-3929. And that is just a voter hotline that, again, you can call in. We staff it nearly every day, with the exception of Sunday. And if you call us and the hotline is not open, we'll give you a call back within 24 hours.
That's awesome.
That is.
How's your you said you've been doing this for a while. I'm assuming that this election and maybe before. How has like everything been since like COVID and having to reach out? I mean, is a lot of it via website and phone calls, or are you able to meet with people in person, drop in places?
Yeah, so a lot of it has gone virtual. And voting, of course, more folks than ever are going to vote via absentee at home this cycle, vote absentee early in person, or they're going to vote by mail. And those are three different processes that, depending on who you are, you could be eligible for one and not the other. And that kind of wrinkle has caused a lot of confusion. And so we hear folks' confusion, we hear folks' anger. And frankly, I know that there's been some sowing of discontentment and disinformation of whether or not you actually will be able to vote and whether or not your vote is counted. And so a lot of my job is just to really put people at ease, and my team's job is to put people at ease and know that there's folks behind you trying to ensure that if you're eligible to vote, that you can vote on election day or before, if that makes sense for you and your family. But COVID has upended everything. And I don't need to tell folks, if I talk to our local election agencies, they'll tell you they've had more people vote absentee this time, and we're only 2 weeks into absentee voting, than they have the entire cycle in previous cycles. And that's just because folks are worried about COVID, and that's a very real concern. And so we want to make sure that you know what your options are.
How are you, I have another question, sorry. How are you reaching out to like marginalized groups that don't maybe have access to public transportation and don't have access to maybe internet or things like that to vote that way or get information?
Yeah, one thing we try to do is that we try to walk them through all of their virtual options that they have. That includes registering to vote, for instance, online, even through your phone, then having to go into an LEA. And if you have to go into an LEA, we want you to talk to us. And so we can tell you all of what you need so you won't have to come back. Also, if you want to vote early absentee, you can if you meet certain requirements. One of them being at risk for COVID, being immunocompromised or over the age of 65. And so you'll see a lot of people taking advantage of that option because there's smaller crowds voting in person right now than we anticipate on election day. In fact, whole person will actually be a satellite location the next couple of weeks where you can go there and vote early absentee if you like.
I love that.
That's true. Yeah. So this is why we selected this location. It's a polling spot for Kansas City residents in the area, but it's also going to an absentee, an opportunity for people to vote early as well. So we definitely wanted to educate and let people know, your polling place may change and there may be an option to come in early. So to let people know that for sure.
Yeah, and what's even more interesting, and again, that's why we have that hotline, 314-652-3929, is because you may be like, Phyllis, what you heard is great, but I want to make sure I got it all right, so don't hesitate to give us a call. But Kansas City is a unique place. I don't need to tell y'all that we are in 4 different counties. And so the rules we have, if you are a Kansas City voter living in Jackson County, is actually different than if you are a Kansas City voter living in Cass County, Clay, or Platte. So if you are a Kansas City resident living in Jackson County, you vote through something called the Kansas City Election Board. And actually this year, every polling location is a central polling location. So there is no such thing as going to your unique polling location. If you vote on the little computer monitor, you can show up in any polling location that makes sense for you. That means it could be one near your job or one near something else you have to do that day. And they'll actually be able to pull up your unique ballot. So we do have a lot more options than we've had in previous cycles, which again can cause confusion. So reach out to us if you got questions and we'll walk you through your specific situation.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the Missouri side and what Missouri is doing, and Ellie is on the Kansas side. So we're trying to cover our bi-state area here. So yeah. Ellie, what have y'all done, as like Ace was asking about COVID, it's definitely changed the game and the way you interact with voters. So what does it look like on your end, especially with the focus being on the equal vote? So you're querying the vote, you want to engage our LGBTQ plus community members.
Yeah, so we have a somewhat unique platform for voter outreach. We use relational organizing, which is not an unfamiliar concept. So it's progressed everything from the civil rights movement to Tupperware sales. But this idea of the most effective messenger is someone that you know we're most likely to make changes or engage in the process if someone we know reaches out to us. So we were actually set up really well in light of COVID, because we have been virtual from the pilot of this program. And it was based on relationships that already exist, that aren't reliant on having to be in person together. They can be about phone calls, they can be about texting, they can be about whatever your normal mode of communicating with your own network is. So we have an online platform. So we have a suite of online tools. So one of them is called Voter to Voter, and it uses relational organizing. And we tap into what is public record, but generally only accessible to campaigns and candidates. And that is anyone who's registered to vote in Kansas, what is their voting history? So we have a system where you can go online. If you're signed up with one of our teams, you can look up all your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors, and find out what their propensity score is. And that just means how many of the last 4 general elections, November elections, they voted in. Are you thinking about stalking your friends?
No, I just think that's so captivating. You can that information is available, viewable, it's, you know, out there. I just didn't think people capture that kind of information. That's really cool that you can.
Yeah. So normally it's not accessible to people. Normally it's like something you have to go to an election office as a campaign and buy this file. So we've made it accessible, easy to look at, because everyone says, make sure your friends are voting. And I know my response is, well, all my friends are voting, so what could I do? So this is how you look up and you find which of my friends, and in this case, I'm reaching out to queer organizations, activist groups, college groups, pride groups, getting them to form teams. So we're trying to like spread this through the LGBTQ plus community all across Kansas. And then those folks that are members of those teams use this platform to reach out to their networks. So it's a way to find the people who normally are kind of left out of that information loop. And then you can see this person I know is not voting regularly. They've only voted in 0 or 1 of the last 4 elections. And then we provide resources not to shame them. We don't ever contact them. So they're only contacted by people they know. So not to shame them, but to be like, what are the things that are preventing them from voting? Is it lack of safety? Is it lack of access? Is it lack of information? And how do we use the community that they're already a part of to support them through overcoming whatever those barriers are? So we provide a ballot guide based on their address, a website, ksballot.org. You put in someone's address, it pulls up all the candidates who will be on their ballot and links to their social media, to their websites. We have like vote by mail, frequently asked questions. We have how to vote. We have all of the information, even to the degree of, did you know that in every county in Kansas, it requires a different amount of postage to send your mail-in ballot back? So we have a spreadsheet of how many stamps do you need to put on your ballot to send it back. We just want to like do the logistical heavy lifting. So people, like you were saying, Phyllis, like it's confusing right now, and voting shouldn't be confusing. This should be accessible. And how can we try to remove some of that confusion and figure out those details and present them? So that's what we do. We do the relational organizing and then provide a lot of resources trying to stay up to date on all the current options and issues with voting.
Yeah, it sounds like you're working on like addressing the barriers that are limiting for people to vote, whether it be, you know, can I make it to my polling place? And I think Ellie, you and Phyllis both touched on ways that you're addressing that, and especially with like stamps needed to mail your ballot back. I mean, it should be a flat stamp fee. I mean, it's your vote. I mean, it should just be what are they, 42 cents now? 47? I haven't mailed something in so long. I have no idea how much stamps cost. So I think it should just be the one stamp that you need to get your ballot in, or you shouldn't need to mail it at all. But
Right.
Yeah, or pay for the mail-in, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had some of these conversations that, we really shouldn't have these jobs. Like, people should turn 18 and be registered to vote. Like, that's how it works in a lot of countries. Like, it's amazing that organizations like Show Me Change are there and empowering people, but like, what? Why we shouldn't even be here doing this?
Yeah,
I couldn't agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more on that, Ellie. I would love to not have a job doing this, and would love to not get the number of calls that we do. So we do have some work to do.
Yeah, isn't that like you're required to, when you're 18 to like register to be in the draft? Like if there was a draft or something like military service, like I joined the military when like I passed doing that registration. So I don't
feel like I ever did something like that. And if that did happen, I feel like maybe my dad did it for me.
Yeah.
I feel like at 18, I was kind of just like,
Yeah. Like,
do I have to move out, or like I don't want to go to college and I like go to, like this video game.
Right. So I want to touch on that. So like what you're talking about when you were a teen, my daughter is 20. So that conversation around voting and stuff like that, she's like, I'm ready to vote. I know where I'm voting. I know what I'm voting for. Like it's a very moot point. Like there's no deeper dive into discussion. So what work are y'all doing to engage youth, like our young adult voters who this may be the first presidential election they get to vote in? Like, how are you engaging them in that dynamic process?
Let's start with Phyllis.
You want to go, Phyllis?
Sure. So for me, I always like to make politics very local, because I think that we all get immersed as a country every 4 years for the presidential, but we know that the majority of things that are impacting your life are actually decided at the local level. And what's cool is that you get to vote on that too. And so there's other amendments on the ballot this year, everything from a gerrymandering amendment to the judges that often make decisions that we see in the news. And so I think always giving an example about something that makes you mad and tracing that to how an elected official probably could have changed that circumstance for you is what I've seen activates young people the most when it comes to actually owning their right to vote and taking a lot of pride in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. The Voter Network, we do. Sorry, my dog likes to roll around on his back and try to distract me when I'm on Zoom. He just started. I'm like, stop being cute. I'm doing something very important. So we have a youth engagement initiative also that's trying to go onto a lot of college campuses virtually using this relational organizing concept. And I will say, I heard this figure recently and it kind of blew me away, that you can guess someone based on their age, the voter turnout for that age. So 18-year-olds, about 18%, 70-year-olds, about 70%. That kind of blows me away. And something we like to address is that it's about a lot more than just voting. So you think about, why has the kind of student debt crisis not been addressed? And one of the reasons is campaigns, policymakers, they know that that is not their base that's going to support them. And so they don't lean their policies in that direction. Similar with like the queer community. 1 in 5 LGBTQ plus people is not registered to vote. And that's actually like 21% in 2019 of LGBTQ plus people were not registered to vote versus 17% of the overall population. So what I like to think about encouraging people, like, it's not just about you and this one vote. It's about what's the community that you're part of that you want to lift up. And if you're arriving as a kind of voting block, you're building power for the voice of your community. So if young folks, I mean, if they showed up, they would transform everything. Like, they could build that power as a community, and policymakers would, to some extent, have to listen.
Yeah,
Right.
and to build off that a little bit, Ellie, I know that there is barriers specifically to the LGBTQI community regarding registering to vote and feeling like you can actually set that right. There's two I would like to address really, really quickly. The first one is housing insecurity. We know that there's a disproportionate number of housing insecure LGBTQI youth. And so you may think that, well, if I don't have a specific permanent location defined by a place that has my name on a lease, I don't think I can vote. That's not true. Call us, we'll walk you through the process to how to get registered to vote, even though you're housing insecure. The second issue is for my non-gender binary folks or my folks that are identified as trans and worry that the picture on their ID that they took when they were 18 doesn't necessarily match how they present today. You still have the right to vote. In fact, there are other documents you can take that will verify your identity, that if your picture in particular is a cause of discomfort for you. That's one thing. And two, legally speaking, the picture is not the point at all, actually. It's just a address verification process when they ask you for your form of ID, which of course can be a utility bill, it can be that registration card you get in the mail, or it can be your state ID or government issued ID. So I know that there is a lot of disinformation out there that just really creates this concern that you will have to grapple with at the polling booth. A lot of the things that may be impacting you as an LGBTQI, particularly as a youth. But I'm here to tell you that there's actually ways for us to help you navigate that process so that your voice too can be heard.
Absolutely. If people are interested, I'm sure you have very direct resources. I have a handout that trans folks can take to the poll with them that is instructions for the poll workers. It's from a national organization, because oftentimes the issue is kind of the discretion of the individual poll worker who might question the gender marker or the picture, even though that's not legally applicable. And I do want to say in Kansas, we have totally different, it's just so wild, right across the state line.
Totally different.
Totally different. I'm just like, it's wild. So we have mail-in ballots that you don't have to get notarized, and you can drop off at drop boxes and early voting locations. So this is a really good option for folks who want to not send it through the mail, but don't want to go to like the big polling day and be exposed. So that's a great option. There is early voting, not absentee. You can just go. There's different locations and hours starting October 14th all across Kansas. You could still register to vote in Kansas until October 13th. So you still got time. Missourians, go now, do it, get on there. Why are you even listening to this?
And I'm not going to kid you, Ellie. I pride myself on giving Kansas a hard time about everything. But I cannot give Kansas a hard time about some of the measures they've taken to make voting more accessible. So I know if you're on the Missouri side of the line, got more questions, there's more processes, and so you may need more help, and that's okay. But this is the only time ever y'all will hear me give a shout out to Kansas for how they've actually moved forward on their access to vote. The only time. So I'm hoping this is recorded, because this is the only time that will happen.
12:52 on October 7th.
Well, I think you both brought up an interesting point of something that I haven't ever considered or thought about, and that was what it's like for a trans individual to vote. I mean, we talk about how important it is to exercise your right to vote and, to be engaged in that process. But for a trans individual, it could be a trauma-inducing state. It could be an outing situation in what could be a volatile area, depending on who is in that environment when you're outed by, the poll, by the person sitting at that table. I can't think what they're called.
Yeah, the poll worker. That sounds good.
Yeah, the poll dancer.
The poll dancer, yes.
The poll dancer. Mm-hmm. that would make voting interesting.
I think we get a lot more people out voting.
I think about that all the time, though. I mean, I have a lot of trans friends. Are surrounded by a lot of non-binary trans humans, and I think about that safety all the time and like what that fear would be like. And it's just, I think like what Ellie said earlier, like with her organization and what they go through is like, we're we're talking to people to start their own things, to get their own friend groups. And I think it's really important, especially queer people, to extend a hand to our friends and let them know, like, hey, this is what we should do this, but also like, what are you doing that day? Like, I'm in Jackson County, or you're here. Like, do you just want to go together? Like, make it a fun, like, we'll grab coffee, we'll all ride there together. We'll like make sure everyone's safe. We'll do our voting. We'll do a bunch of selfies with our voter stickers.
Right? Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is about extending that support within your community networks, and that really makes a difference, especially for folks who have been left out of the process or felt unsafe in some way, whether it's people of color, trans people, queer people, housing insecure people. Like, how can we find people where they are and bring them to the table in a safe way?
Yeah, and I talked to earlier, before we started our Zoom, I was talking with the two individuals who, were working to help us facilitate this space and use it here at the Whole Person. And we were talking, she was like, what is this show about? Like, what is, what's your focus? And we're like candid conversations about topics that, center around our guests that we bring on, with, the social determinants of health orbiting them. And with everything that we're discussing and talking about voting and what impacts person's ability to vote or to feel that they're secure enough to vote, I mean, those are the exact same check boxes for the social determinants of health, of like what impacts a person's healthy living, where there's housing, food access, employment. I'm like, it touches on both when it comes to voting. Like, voting is just as critical as access to food or housing. Like, it makes a big difference. It increases your ability to access those services, but also limits your ability to access voting as well.
Yeah, the Voter Network is funded by a lot of health organizations because, which came first, but the communities with the lowest voter turnout are the same communities with the poorest health outcomes. And so, like, where do you start addressing that? Or do we just try to address it from all perspectives, one small piece, our piece, your piece being voting?
Yeah, and that's on the Kansas side. I think it'd be interesting to see how, going forward with the work that your program is doing, how that can be used, crossing state lines and encouraging people from all over the country to engage in that. I mean, we don't vote just this one time every 4 years. As Phyllis said, we vote continuously, and educating ourselves and others and creating those networks, of like your team of friends who you go vote, that, grows every year as you go and vote.
And I love what Phyllis said earlier too about like, it doesn't have to just be like the one time every 4 years. It's like, if everything starts local, and if you just have a passion for something and you like, I want to do this, or I'm really upset about this, like trace it back locally to like who's doing this and what people are in a position of power that will determine your outcome for the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, whatever it is, and start like learning stuff about them. And then pulling what Ellie said, like start talking to your friends about it that live next door to you or down the street that you hang out with. And I think that that's something that it's such an easy breakdown for like myself and I think us to comprehend, but there's a lot of, I would say even our peers that don't understand like how, want to get involved, want to be educated, but don't know the right avenues. And I think it's up to some of us to be like, hey, let's have this conversation. Like we don't always have to talk about RuPaul and hair and makeup and, like what gay bar we're going to next or like what vacation we're taking, but we can also talk about like, hey, did you know, like, the city's doing this, or like, what do you think about this, or this person that's in, like, I think that that's important to have those conversations and make it more normalized. And I think that that's a little bit like what this show is about as well, is like taking some conversations that may be difficult to talk about, maybe because you're uneducated, because you're insecure, because you don't know the right verbiage or questions or even what to do, and breaking it down and kind of normalizing it. And like, I really, really love like that Phyllis said, like, definitely like just find what you're passionate about and go for that. I have a lot of people of my friend groups that I've been friends with for 20 years. And they're like, Ace, you volunteer for all these things. You go to all this stuff. You're on these panels. Like, how do I get involved? And my number one thing I tell people is like, if you really want to get involved, find something that you're passionate about and just show up. Just show up for a meeting. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to sit in the front row, and just listen and show up to a couple of those. And then you'll figure out either A, I'm passionate about this and I want to move forward, or I'm not, and I'll find something else. But like, I think just showing up for your life is what it is. But it is our responsibility as well as humans that kind of are educated on some of these topics to like talk to our friends about it and have that conversation over lunch or dinner or whatever we're doing.
And you can really do it nowadays without having to be, you know, like putting yourself in a space where you don't know a whole bunch of people and you feel awkward, you know, just going to a meeting and I don't know anybody there. You can zoom in now. Like all those meetings are Zoom, so nobody even sees you.
Yeah, you don't have to put a picture, you can mute it. Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. And just to underscore, I think my heart always goes out to folks who want to get involved, but because they don't feel like they have this legacy of involvement, it's hard for them to start. People won't take them seriously. It's difficult for them to get involved, and they really don't know how to begin. I do think that voting is a great way to kind of start your political engagement. If you have not voted before then, it won't matter. Your vote will count the same number as someone who's voted in every single cycle before you. So let today and let this cycle be the one. I promise you, it's one that's going to go down in history. 2020 will be talked about a lot. And so you will be able to say that these were the issues I voted on, and this is kind of how I landed, and this is who I wanted to support to put in the White House or the governorship or what have you. So my heart goes out to organizations like Ellie. I appreciate what y'all are doing because I do think sometimes folks just need that hand extended to them to let them know that their opinions matter, their perspective matters. And you can always start today on kind of that journey of being having civic and political engagement.
Yeah. So good.
So I thought about this while Ace was talking about, you know, stigma reduction and having those conversations, you know, like we do on the show. And that made me think of the work that, Ellie, that you're doing. So you're creating these networks for people to engage in these conversations and to educate others and to build, you know, that voter base that they have, you know, friends and family. How are you engaging people with that stigma of talking about politics and voting and who they're voting for and educating themselves? Like right now, that is such a visceral topic.
Yeah.
Class friction really quickly,
real fast.
Especially right now with this.
It's so true. And that's, I think one of the reasons we try to give people lots of resources, very specific detailed information, and we give them the option. You can talk about issues that you're passionate about. You can make an emotional plea, or you can just say, a deadline is coming up. Here's where you can request your mail-in ballot. I care about you. Here's information. If you're not prepared to engage in those conversations, you can still make a difference just by providing resources, providing information, and just checking in. You can say, we don't have to talk about who you're voting for. I just want you to know that I care that you vote. And that can be the end of the conversation. And sometimes that's all it takes is one person in your life saying, I care if you vote. Are you going to vote? Do you have a plan? Here's some information. And then if you are a bold person and you want to dive on in, then you get it.
And I think to underscore Ellie's point, ironically, when you're centering the issues and not the political parties, you get a lot further faster, regardless of who you're talking to. And so even if I'm talking to someone on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, if I'm talking about things like voter rights and how we can make sure that more folks have access to vote, if I'm talking about things like healthcare and the Crown Act just passed in Kansas City, which bars discrimination based on how your hair is styled, those types of things and those types of issues that actually have a real impact on people, when we start there and put the focus there, we get a lot further faster. So I couldn't underscore that enough. That's why, yes, I'm a member of Show Me Change, but for me, it's more important, and I will work just as hard for someone who shows up to a polling location that probably won't vote the same way I do to have the right to vote, because that's the issue that's really, really important and what we all need to be working for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Phyllis. Like, find a starting point, a bridge that you can both stand on, meet in the middle. Like you may not agree on your candidate or your political party, but you agree you both have the right to vote. And how can we make sure our neighbor has the right to vote and the person down this, the next state over has the right to vote? So I think that's a really good place to start. I mean, we're all human. We're all citizens and Americans, and we all have a right to vote. And that's a really good place to start on an issue that everybody in some way or another is aware of. Yeah. Ace, do we have any comments, questions? I haven't had any. I just got my watch party started.
Yeah, I don't know how I didn't figure this out very well, and I think I actually started 2 watch parties, but I don't think I did them right. But I don't have. Let me look on the Woody's one. I don't think there's any questions on the Woody's one either. Yeah. I don't know. There's so much happening. This is the first time I've had 2 people Zoom in at once, and we're in a whole new space, so I'm just like,
yeah. So
and I got here a little late. I'm just like, oh, I have coffee though, so does that make it better?
Yeah, it does.
I always try to skate in like because I'm not like the tech person, so I'm like, if I skate in late, then I don't have to deal with any of that, and I don't have to learn new stuff. I don't know. We don't have any questions. Do you have any?
Well, I think as we're wrapping up this conversation, if we'll take these last few minutes to share advice or plug your websites and work that you're doing, and work to engage other people, the floor is yours. Please take this time to share and plug your work. We'll have Ellie and then Phyllis.
Okay, great. So the work I told you about is accessible to any of you. Even if you live in Missouri, you probably know some people on the Kansas side. So you could still search for, your few Kansas voter friends, check out how they're doing, and then make a commitment to reach out to them in some way. So anybody who wants to get involved in that, if you have an organization that wants to form a team, or if you I have an in-house equal vote team that you can join. So you can email me if you want to. I am your liaison. That's French for liaison. And the email is Ellie, ELLIE, at thevoternetwork.org. Ellie at thevoternetwork.org. You can also go to that same website, and that houses all sorts of resources, information, a ballot guide, vote by mail questions. You can just dive into voting nerddom there if you want to. And then the other place that I would really push is ksvotes.org. That is where, because you have until October 13th if you live in Kansas, that's where you can register to vote. It's where you can check your registration, which even if you're already registered, we recommend that you go in and just make sure everything looks good with your registration. And you can also request a mail-in ballot there. And remember, in Kansas, if you request a mail-in ballot, you can still drop it in a drop box or an election office personally. You don't have to get it notarized. You don't have to send it through the mail. So ksvotes.org to take care of that business. And then to join me on a team, Ellie at thevoternetwork.org.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so everyone's hearing a lot of noise this election cycle, and I get it. It's causing concern, it's causing questions, and I think there's a lot of folks out there worried that if I do vote, will my vote count? And so I'm here to tell you that there's a whole team of folks working to make sure that if you're eligible to vote, you can vote, and that your vote will count. And so a couple pieces of advice. The first one, similar to what Ellie said, actually, check to make sure that everything is good on your paperwork, what my grandma would say. Make sure your paperwork is right. And you can do that at the movotesafe.org website. We'll walk you through the steps to check your registration. Secondly, you want to kind of have an idea of how you plan on voting this year, because your situation could be unique. You may be worried about COVID. You may be worried that you won't be in your jurisdiction on election day. There's a whole host of things that may actually impact you going to a polling place on election day. And so you can figure out ways to be able to vote early or vote via absentee or vote by mail. Unfortunately, Missouri is one of the few states where those things are different. And we are here to walk you through that process. Lastly, once you have your plan in place on how you are going to vote, go do it. Get it done. We are in the midst of a pandemic. We don't know how things are going to shift. And between now and November, things may change. And so there's a lot of reasons to execute on your voting plan early. And luckily, voting is open. Absentee voting is open in person on the Missouri side. It's been that way for 2 weeks. Vote by mail is still allowed, and they're still accepting applications. None of this can be true for you, though, if you've not registered to vote by the end of the day today. So I thank you so much. This is a very timely conversation because today is the last day to register to vote here on the Missouri side. But once you're out there to vote, you'll probably see someone from my team at that polling location, ensuring that you have the right to vote and you can do so free from intimidation this election cycle. So we're excited. Exercise your right to vote. It's a fun time. And it's you a sticker. I do think they should switch from stickers to suckers, kind of like at the dentist. But, you know, I had through legislation as of this point. But until now, you get a sticker. And you still get a sticker if you vote absentee, which was important to me at least.
That's very important.
Ace, do you have any?
No, I'm like super excited that I got to meet you two. Like, this is really fun. I hope that I see you guys again in the future. You're awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. And regardless of where you live, letting our viewers know, you can go to iwillvote.org and you can map out a whole plan on where to vote, how to vote, find other people to vote with, use Ellie, use Phyllis's sites, their information to build that knowledge bank so that you can have those conversations. And everybody, exercise your right to vote, educate yourself, and work to educate those around you. Thank y'all, and I hope everyone has a safe week left as we enter October. We're not coming up, we're gonna have conversations with other politicians who have ran for office. We have some support groups that are coming on talking about Alcoholics Anonymous and what that looks like. And then Ace and I are going to be wrapping up October with some costumes. So we're really looking forward to our celebrity guests that will be joining us. And we encourage y'all to keep sharing, keep talking about the work that we're doing and the work that you're doing in your communities and educating everybody that you come across.
Yeah. Also, if anybody has any questions, if they weren't able to come on the live show, please leave it in the comments below and we will get back to you and we will answer all your questions or direct you to some important, amazing people that can answer questions. Also, if there's any of my LGBTQIA plus friends and family that want someone to go with them to vote, I definitely will give you a ride. I'll probably bring you coffee. We can gather about American Idol before we go in. It's super fun. Just let me know. Don't be afraid to vote. Your vote does count. I love you all. You're amazing. Thank you, Ellie and Phyllis, again for joining us.
Thank you all.
Bye.
See you guys. Bye.